Perhaps best known for being a founding member of two immensely popular and influential 60s bands, the Byrds and Crosby, Stills and Nash, has died at age 81. Let's take a few minutes to pay homage to one of music's most beloved icons. Facts First presents David Crosby of Crosby, Stills and Nash, dead at 81. He was musically gifted from the get-go. David Van Cortlandt Crosby was born August 14, 1991 in Los Angeles. He was the second son of the Academy Award-winning cinematographer Floyd Crosby and Macy's salesperson Aleph Van Cortlandt. David grew up in a well-off household. He was also surrounded by music from an early age. His older brother Ethan was also a musician, although he never came close to the level of success that his sibling did, and sadly, he wound up taking his own life. Growing up in Southern California, David attended several schools, including Crane Country School in Montecito, University Elementary School in LA, and Laguna Blanca School in Santa Barbara. While attending Crane, he learned he had a knack for public performance. After joining the theater club, he starred in HMS Pinafore and several other musicals. Unfortunately, he was ousted from the school due to a lack of academic progress. In 1960, after years of marital troubles, David's parents decided that enough was enough and got divorced. The senior Crosby later got remarried to a woman named Betty Cormack Andrews. After high school, Crosby briefly studied theater at Santa Barbara City College, but dropped out to pursue music. As a fledgling musician, he performed with guitarist and singer-songwriter Terry Callier in Greenwich Village and in Chicago. But the duo called it quits after failing to land a record deal. Around this time, David also performed with the folk outfit Les Baxter's Balladeers. In 1963, Crosby recorded his first solo session with the assistance of producer friend Jim Dixon. He helped make the Byrds an international sensation. He returned to Chicago after a few years in the Big Apple and reconnected with Terry Callier. Touring the nation and making waves in the Chicago music scene at the time was South African singer, songwriter, actress, and civil rights hero Miriam Makeba. Both Callier and Makeba happened to know multi-instrumentalist Jim McGuinn and subsequently introduced him to Crosby. The two quickly struck up a friendship and began performing with fellow musician Gene Clark in a band called The Jet Set. In time, however, they changed their name to The Byrds while adding bassist Chris Hillman and drummer Michael Clark. Through connections that the band's manager, Jim Dixon, had with Bob Dylan's publicist, the Byrds got their hand on a demo acetate disc of Dylan's song Mr. Tambourine Man. With Crosby on rhythm guitar, McGuinn on the 12-string, Hillman and Michael in their respective roles, and everyone on harmonizing vocals, the band recorded a version of the song that wound up turning into a massive hit. Mr. Tambourine Man reached #1 on the US charts and not long after hit the top position on the UK charts as well. While McGuinn is credited with coming up with the Byrds' signature 12-string sound, Crosby was the one primarily responsible for the group's soaring harmonies and frequently unorthodox phrasing. The Byrds, with Crosby's help, became pioneers of the folk rock music genre. In addition to Mr. Tambourine Man, they scored yet another early hit with their 1965 cover of Pete Seeger's song Turn, Turn, Turn. As the 60s progressed and psychedelia and the hippie movement began to sweep across the globe, the band became very influential in popularizing the genres of psychedelic rock and raga rock. Creative differences ultimately plagued the band, and in 1967, Crosby, allegedly peeved by his bandmates' refusal to release his song Triad, left the Byrds shortly after their legendary performance at the Monterey Pop Festival. He refined his sound with Crosby, Stills and Nash. After producing folk singer-songwriter Joni Mitchell's debut '68 album, David recorded a handful of solo tracks and started jamming with former Buffalo Springfield guitarist and vocalist Stephen Stills. Stills and Crosby had a ton of chemistry, but they knew if they wanted to put together something special, they'd need to toss another musician into the mix. Enter ex-Hollies member Graham Nash. With their three-part delicious harmonies, strong songwriting, and breezy folk rock sound, Crosby, Stills, and Nash released their debut LP in 1969. The record became a pop landmark and launched all three members to greater heights. The band expanded once again into a four-piece in August of 1969 when ex-Buffalo Springfield member Neil Young joined the party. Not long after, the group played their second-ever live performance at Woodstock. In 1970, they dropped what many believe is their best album, Deja Vu. The number of advanced orders numbered over 2 million. With songs like Ohio and Woodstock, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young emerged as one of the generation's chief cultural and music torchbearers. The group went on hiatus for the next few years, so Crosby took the opportunity to resume work on his long-anticipated solo debut, If I Could Only Remember Your Name, which was finally released in 1971. Crosby and Nash reunited in 1974, marked by the release of their album Wind of the Water. They followed that up with their multi-platinum album CSN, this time with Stills rejoining the group. While things seemed to be going well for Crosby and his fellow musicians, his long-standing substance abuse issues began to cause chaos in his life. This led to him having a falling out with Stills and Nash. Crosby continued to battle with drug addiction and legal issues for the better part of the next decade. In the process, he faced a series of arrests for drug possession and weapons charges. Eventually, it culminated in Crosby being sentenced to prison in late 1985 after fleeing a rehabilitation center he had entered instead of serving a jail sentence. After getting released from prison the following August, Crosby was clean and sober and committed to maintaining that course. While he continued to perform solo or with Nash for the next several decades, Crosby, Stills, and Nash would only tour together sporadically. In recent years, he put out highly regarded albums such as 2017's Sky Trails, 2018's Here If You Listen, and 2021's For Free. He was a man of many loves, talents, and passions. Not only was Crosby a legendary music artist, he was also a devoted family man. In 1962, he and his girlfriend at the time welcomed the birth of a son named James Raymond. Not ready to be a father, James was given up for adoption, but the two later reunited. Beginning in the mid-90s, Raymond performed with Crosby both on stage and in the studio as a pianist. From 1996 to 2004, Crosby and Raymond joined forces with session guitarist Jeff Pevar to form the band CPR. Later in his life, Crosby had 3 other children. He and a woman named Jackie Guthrie had a daughter named Erica. With another former girlfriend named Debbie Donovan, Crosby had a second daughter named Donovan Crosby. David's youngest child, a son named Django, was conceived with his wife, Jan Dance. Crosby and Dance married in 1987. She remained by his side until his death. In 2000, Melissa Etheridge revealed that Crosby had been the sperm donor for the 2 children she had with her partner, Julie Cypher. Sadly, one of these children, a son named Beckett, passed away in 2020 from an opioid-related death. Although David battled drug addiction for many years, he was able to set the hard stuff down. As a lifelong proponent of the benefits of cannabis, Crosby formed his own craft cannabis brand called Mighty Cros in the 2010s. Another one of his hobbies was sailing. Following a life-changing sailing experience when he was 11, David eventually purchased a 59-foot schooner named Mayan with the financial help of the late Peter Tork of the Monkees. In the decades before he sold the ship in 2014, Crosby reportedly sailed thousands of miles throughout the Caribbean and Pacific. He credited his love affair with sailing and his intimate relationship with the Mayan as being the inspiration for many of his best-known songs, including The Lee Shore, Carry Me, and Wooden Ships. David remained politically active throughout his career. He identified as a pacifist, and he regularly spoke out against the U.S.'s involvement in foreign wars, especially in Vietnam. More recently, he was an outspoken critic of Donald Trump, and during the 2020 election, he voted for Bernie Sanders. Branching out from his music career, Crosby took a stab at acting in the early 90s, appearing as a guest star in several episodes of The John Larroquette Show. He also appeared as a guest star on sitcoms like Ellen and Roseanne. In 1991, he played a pirate in the Steven Spielberg film Hook. That same year, he played a 70s hippie in Backdraft. In 1992, he appeared in his final film role, portraying a bartender in Thunder Heat. With his rock and roll lifestyle, David Crosby put his body through extensive abuse, particularly in his younger years. He had to have a liver transplant in 1994, which incidentally, Phil Collins paid for. Crosby also suffered from type 2 diabetes and heart disease. While we're not yet certain what he ultimately died of, it is known he'd been ill for quite some time. Now it's time to hear from you. What's your favorite memory of David Crosby? What's your favorite Crosby, Stills, and Nash song? Let us know in the comments section below.